And we are live, continuing on with Highland Peated single malt Scotch whiskey semester. Alrighty, so but the whole point of doing this semester is to see if there are differences between Highland and Islay peated whiskeys. Challenge being that, of course, some Highland distilleries use Islay peat to make their whiskeys, but still, maybe in the aging process and the time spent perhaps on land, does it pick up different characteristics? Also, just sort of see what profile the different distilleries do with their whiskey. So tonight I am doing the Ballantruan 10-year-old, the peated malt, Speyside Glenlivet single malt Scotch whiskey, a 10-year-old. This is the Lagavulin Offerman edition 11-year-old. Originally, I was going to do the 16-year-old, but I thought get something a little bit closer to the age, get it down to 11. Crazy thing is about the prices that is going on with these whiskeys. So you can get this, the 10-year-old, for about $60, at least in my neighborhood. When I bought this 11-year-old from when it first released, it was about $90. It's now going for $140 in my neighborhood. So the price is just absolutely insane. So in terms of buying this one or that one, I think it's going to be a huge factor. $140 is absolutely insane. I would not spend, frankly, I wouldn't spend over $100. 100. If you're really going to push it and you really, really want to, maybe go to 110, 120, but I really want it. So ABV, this is 46% alcohol by volume. Old Ballantruan is 50% alcohol by volume. So, I mean, this thing, we get some advantages going on here. Price, it seems to be widely available. It's huge and a little bit more in the ABV. So, looks like I got 4 people who's tuning in. Aladdin Sane, thank you much for tuning in. Chris McClure, thank you much for tuning in. So, last week I did the Glenlivet Nadura peated cask and the what was the other one? Dunaville's, excellent Dunaville's peated cask, an Irish whiskey. So it was peated cask versus peated cask. And I went into talking about 3 different ways in which you can peat a whiskey. If you didn't see that video, you want to learn a bit more about that, go back and check out that video, and I'll put a link in this. Whiskey Straight Out, thank you much for tuning in. Werner Lackner, thank you very much for tuning in. So I had some quiz questions in the last video. We went into what is peat. This is decaying organic matter that hasn't yet become coal. And we went into the number of different ways in which you can peat a whiskey. And so I'm not going to repeat all that in this one. But we're going to kick off this one. We're going to have 3 quiz questions. I also shared a couple of videos talk about peat and from Lagavulin Lafroig Distillery, and they talked about peat and stuff like that. So gonna have start with a couple quiz questions actually. But before I get into that, let me pour me a little bit. By the way, next week is Christmas. I am gonna go live at 5 p.m. or thereabouts. If anything changes, I will go live on Christmas Day. So I am doing a Christmas show. My plan is to do live every Friday and keep that going into the new year. So I will go live on Friday. So if you haven't got anything to do, I know a lot of people aren't seeing relatives because relatives aren't getting together because of COVID and all that kind of stuff. None of my brothers, I have a brother lives here with me, but my other brothers, they didn't want to get together. So just me and my brother here for Christmas breakfast and Christmas dinner. Alan Simpson, thank you very much for tuning in. He says glitchy stream. Glitchy. Let me know if everybody, there's not much I can do. I can't fix it on my end. Anyway, so I'll continue on. All right, so I'm going to start off with the first. So this is actually question number 3. The first 2 questions were in last week. So I'll be starting off with question number 3, picking up from last week. So let's see. Peat quiz, question number 3. Aroma flavor compounds from peat come from phenols, such as Guaiacol, Creosol, and so forth. Oily in nature, they stick to wet barley. They are measured in parts per million, or ppm. Now, so here's the question. The phenol count for whiskey measured at 55 ppm. So you got a whiskey, and they say that it's at 55 ppm. Where was that ppm measured at? A, the barley post-kilning prior to being turned into grist. So this was before they ground the barley. So that's question A. B, post-fermentation, but prior to distillation. C, post-distillation, but prior to maturation. D, post-maturation, but prior to consumption. So after it's been aged, probably put in the bottle. Or D, post-consumption, determined by measuring the ppms in whiskey farts. All right. Vegas Art says it's working fine. That's good. So Whiskey Owl, you're 8 hours ahead. So if you want to know what time, you're always going to be 8 hours ahead. So it's 5 p.m. here. It's 1 a.m. at your time. All right. All right. So what do you guys think? At what point did they measure the ppm? A, the barley after it's been kilned, but before it's been turned into grist. B, after fermentation, before distillation. C, post distillation, but prior to maturation. Means before they put it into the cask. D, after maturation, but before it's consumed. When it goes into the bottle. Or post consumption, which means basically you wait to drink some whiskey, you fart, and then they see what the ppms are. All right. So what do you guys think it is? Put in an answer. Don't see any answers. George Silvert says C, post distillation, but prior to maturation. Okay. Wow. Vegas Art says after kilning, prior to turning into grist. Chris McClure says C. By the way, this is all just fun. All right. So no need to be embarrassed if you don't know. It's all about learning and having fun. So I always throw in sort of a joke question in there. Post distillation, but prior to maturation. Okay, Whiskey Al, give me an answer. Whiskey Straight Out, put an answer in there. Well, the answer is actually A. It's after kilning and prior to maturation. And now I'm trying to exit. There we go. All right, I'm back. So they measure it. So if you buy, you buy a whiskey. Okay, a whiskey I'll put in there A. So if you buy a whiskey, say Octomore 8.1 or whatever, and then like it's 137 ppms, or you buy an Ardbeg, and that's 55 ppms, and you taste them, you're like, well, this seems just as peaty as that one, and yet this was peated way up here, this peated, because you're gonna lose a lot of the intensity of the peat. Alan Smithy says no glitchy. We'll watch the replay. Too glitchy. Sorry about the Alan. Everybody else seems to think it's just fine. So it might be just your connection. Hopefully it's going all right, and you better watch on the replay. Hey, Cameron Lochner, thank you very much. How you doing? Simplified, dude. All right, next question. Like, man, I thought there was when there's just a bunch of drinking. I didn't want to. So go side by side. Wow. So I'm trying to do whiskeys that they're not necessarily going to taste the same, but it's a fair match, right? You don't want to put Mike Tyson up against Pee Wee Herman. Something that is close enough. It's a fair match to go head to head between them. I wouldn't take a bourbon, put it up against a sherried whiskey. I mean, a Scotch. It wouldn't make any sense. You want to go bourbon versus bourbon, or a rye versus a rye, something like that. So these are whiskeys that I think, from my perception, at least when I was trying them, similar. I'm going to see how they compare. And it's all a learning experience. Alan says, Eric, appreciate your videos, and I admire your whiskey knowledge and enthusiasm, and I don't care if it's my phone or what. Anyhow, so we're going side by side. Wow. Wow. They are much more alike. I didn't smell or taste these before going live here. So this is like the first time I'm approaching these. Wow. They're very, very similar. I'm shocked by how similar they are. It's a slight lemon and lime green character. The intensity of the smoke and peat is very, very similar. They are a lot alike. Which one just on the nose? Actually, I'm liking the old Ballantruan a little bit more. Similar smoke, similar saltiness, similar lemon and lime, similar chocolate character. All right, let's go on to the next quiz question. So thus far on the nose, very, very similar, and I'm quite shocked. I think the palate is where the major change is going to be. Let's go to our next question. All right. So that was question number 3, continuing from last week. Question number 4. In kilning, this is one that I've never, ever heard anybody talk about. In kilning barley to make peated whiskey, what is Coke? What is Coke? A carbonated beverage that malters drink and mix with whiskey. B, a white powder that malters snort up their nose. C, an alternate fuel source which produces less smoke than peat. Or D, a type of special kindling used to start the fire. All right, so Cameron Lochter says D, a special type of kindling. Carlos C says D. Whiskey Al says C, an alternate fuel source. Chris McClure says thinking D. George Seaver is saying C again. Oops. So when I was at Lefroy Distillery, and we're doing a tour, and we get down to where they put the peat in and all that, off to the side of the furnace. Off to the side of where they put the peat in to peat the whiskey, there was a chalkboard because they keep track of things. They write things down on a chalkboard, and it said percentage. I don't remember what the percentage was, but it talked percentage of Coke, and they talked about amount of time of Coke. And the tour guide never said anything about Coke. I was like, Coke? What the heck is that? I've probably got 30 books on whiskey. None of them mention Coke. I've taken classes at the Edinburgh Whiskey Academy, learned about production. Never mentioned Coke. I'm currently going through a class with another organization, taking some classes with another organization for another certification. If you follow me on Facebook, I put a post on about that in my Facebook group. They don't mention Coke. And I was like, what the heck is this Coke? What are they talking about? So doing a little bit of research, on that, looking into it. Let's go back to the questions, the answers. A carbonated beverage that malters drink and mix with whiskey. B, a white powder that malters snort up their nose. C, an ultimate fuel source which produces less smoke than peat. Or D, a type of special kindling used to start the fire. Michael Hassler says Coke is the second place finisher in the Pepsi challenge. All right. So I'm going to give you I'm going to show you a little slide here, and it's going to explain what Coke is. I've never, ever heard anybody talk about this. All right, here we go. Coke is a gray, hard, and porous fuel with a high carbon content and few impurities, made by heating coal or oil in the absence of air. At one time, most Scotch whiskies were peated, but with the development of the use of Coke, it began to replace peat. Coke burns more evenly, more consistently, and with less smoke than peat. The development of rail transport in Scotland led to the wide availability of Coke. The Lowlands and Speyside were the first to convert. All right, so the answer is, if we go back to our questions, the answers, is C. It's an alternate fuel source which produces less smoke than peat. Now, how many of you had ever heard of Coke or even talked about it? But Steve A., thank you much for tuning in. Yeah, it's a lot of live streams. So it actually tonight, Whiskey in the Six is going to go live. So I'm going to try to cut this short and we can all jump over and watch. Rob, Whiskey in the Six is going to have Roy Aquavite, Scotch Test Dummies on there, celebrating his 10,000. So Steve A. said he's heard of Cokes. Michael Astor says Coke is what you add to Jack Daniels. I'm taking a little sip real quick. Start off with the Ballantruan. Really, really nice. It's a little cold, so I'm wearing a nice sweater. Whiskey, cold day is great. Whiskey Straight Out says, never heard of it before, but just thought about it was the most likely to be. So if you think historically, right, peat was a fuel source. They didn't have forests and stuff like that. Coal wasn't available, particularly on the, it was more inland coal was available, although there was a coal mine near Campbellton as well. But so using peat and a lot of whiskeys up in the Highlands, I mean, peated whiskeys were the tradition, go back a couple hundred years, up in the Highlands. So what did they transition to as a fuel source? You know, for electricity and all that. What did they transition to as a fuel source? You might automatically assume, okay, it'd be coal, and they did use coal. But one of the things they switched to was the use of this Coke, called Coke. Now, why is it called Coke? I have the foggiest idea. Sounds strange. I don't know. How did they get that name? I don't know. But so at Laphroaig or any other distillery, if they're peating their barley, but they want to control how much peat is being imparted, you can reduce the amount of smoke, peat smoke is going up. So basically I say, here's where I'm putting in the fire. I'm putting the fire, and then it rises up. And then there's another floor above that, and it's like a cheese grater. And there's a bunch of holes in the floor, and it goes up through the floor and up to where the peated barley is at, right? So smoke's going up through this perforated floor and going there. Now, if you want to reduce the amount of peat smoke, you use a different fuel source, not necessarily completely cut it out, but you add some Coke, a certain percentage of Coke to sort of adjust how much peaty smoke you got going up there. And that's what Coke is for. All right, so you've heard it here, probably here on the first time, what Coke is used and how it's used. And but historically, it can kind of make sense. So how did they transition, unless they have a lot of forests or they're completely using just coal or something, how are they transitioning out of using peat to making non-peated whiskeys or lighter peated whiskeys? And the answer is they use this stuff called Coke. All right, so I just tasted the old Ballantruan 10-year-old. Now I'm going to give it a sip, take a drink of water first, and I'll go over to the Lagavulin 11. I would say the primary difference, what's immediately available, there's more saltiness, there's more oceanic influence on the Lagavulin, But Octomore, like the 8.1, when I did a comparison, it doesn't have a huge oceanic influence. So while it could be a clue, a tip that it's from Islay, you can't assume that if it's from Islay, it's going to have the oceanic character, because it might not. But these are, with the exception of that oceanic character, these are actually quite similar. Steve A says, I suspect Coke is derived from cook, because that's how it's made, by cooking coal to get rid of certain offensive aspects. You know what? You could be right. But it's more to look into. But you could be right. But I don't know. We'll have to look into it. All right. So side by side, very, very, very similar in terms of the chocolate, the smoke, and the fruit characteristics, and the general mouthfeel. Mm, that is good. Wow. I think I'm liking the Ballantruan more. Mm. I think the Ballantruan's more chocolatey, a hair bit sweeter, mouthfeel, texture, length, very, 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 very similar. So qualitatively comparable. Qualitatively comparable. The main difference that's really going to stand out and pop that you're really, really going to notice is going to be the oceanic character, the character. However, remember the price difference, right? $60. Of course, it could be different. Prices can vary depending on where you live and availability and all that. But $60 and what is now $140. But it was even at $90, $30 difference. Even if you still get it retail, what I originally paid for at $90, still I think the old Ballantruan, for me personally, I like it more. I think there's a little bit more, also, I'm picking up now, is a little bit more nuttiness as well. Whiskey Mystery, hey, how you doing? Brooke Lottie using Highland Peat makes sense about the Islay flavors. Mike Hasser, the fuel kind of Coke is the least interesting of all the other kinds of Cokes, and that's a matter of taste. Whiskey Mystery says, love the old Ballantruan 15. I will keep my eyes out for it. I would like to get the old Ballantruan 15. Alrighty, so let's move on to our next slide. This is Erik Waite Whiskey Studies. Want to have fun hanging out, drinking whiskeys, but also always want to throw in a little bit of information. All right, so this is question number 5. Remember, number 1 and 2 were from last week. Okay. Which of the following will determine the final? Oh, here we go. I think I already answered this. Which of the following will determine the final level of ppm in a whiskey? Which of the following will determine the final ppm in a whiskey? A, thickness and age of the peat. B, the source of the peat, such as an island or mainland. C, ferment times, still shape, fill level, speed of distillation, and cut points. Or D, the amount of whiskey consumed from the barrels by the angels, also known as the warehousemen. So which one of these is going to have the greatest effect on the final fill level of ppms in whiskey? Steve A says C. Whiskey Mystery says C, then D. You know what? A lot of my answers end up being C. I didn't plan that. It just turned out that way. Pagan Art says C. And this sort of dovetails with the previous slide. So ferment time, still shape, fill level, speed of distillation, and cut points. So basically, when you start off, you peat your barley. Let's just say 50, just an easy number. At each step along the production process, okay, you peat your barley, you dry it, you then mill it, turn into a grist, right? And then you have to make a mash out of it. You ferment it, and then you have to make it into a wash. Then you distill it, right? And you go through a couple distillations, right? And then you make your cuts. If you haven't seen it before, there's something called a spirit bank. I can't bring a picture up at the moment. Basically, it's a long box, and there's sort of a swivel that in the middle of this box like this. It has windows on it. Usually they're brass framed metal box with a swivel in the middle, and you have 3 little cups on the end of where you're going to go. So the spirit's coming out of this, and you're going to do your cuts. You're going to the guy standing at the spirit bank turns a lever, and he's getting rid of the heads. The heads are going over this way. All right. And then he's going to, then when he gets to the hearts, which is the center part, he turns it, and now we're saving the hearts, and it's going into another spot. And then when you're again turning into the tails, he turns it again, and now the tails are going into another way. So you can do it electronically or manually, but the heads, hearts, and tails are going to go in different directions at the spirit bank, right? So in terms of, and you're going to typically going to keep the heart. Now, where you're doing your cuts, right? Because you can dip into the tails a little bit and bring out a different character. You don't want to do it too much. You get a super sulfury whiskey sometimes. But how you're doing your cuts, how wide you're doing your cuts is going to affect, because you're going to lose actually a lot of your phenols, in the tails, right? So you're going to lose some in fermentation. You're going to lose some in the tails during the cuts, right? So, and then maturation. So, and I mentioned this before in the previous live stream. You get a real young peated whiskey, let's say Wee Beastie, Ardbeg Wee Beastie, 5-year-old, right? Or you get, I'm gonna drink some whiskey. You get a Lagavulin 8, which I did a head-to-head between Lagavulin 8 and Wee Beastie. Personally, I prefer the Wee Beastie, probably because they use a sherry cask, but you get that young spirit in there, but you also get this big, intense peatiness because it has been aged. So some of that peat is going to start to dissipate over time. Although, just because, let's say, Laphroaig is 25 years old doesn't mean that all that peat is gone. But generally speaking, you lose a lot of peat in the process. Joseph McNally says, Eric, I love the hat, man. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is my Santa hat. Normally, my head would be sweating too much to wear this, but it's a little chilly, so I can wear a sweater. I'm kind of curious what the temperature is. It's 52 degrees. So this is not, this right now is Glasgow weather. This is what it's like even in summertime in Glasgow. Scotland not only makes better whiskey, but it has better whiskey drinking weather, right? I'm more in the mood to drink whiskey when it's cold and more in the mood to drink peated whiskey when it's cold. California, not so much. I like a cold weather for having peated whiskey. Alrighty. So, so we covered all our quiz questions. What do I like more? What do I like more between these two? I like the old Ballantruan 10-year-old Speyside Glenlivet single malt Scotch whiskey. Don't get me wrong. All right. Nick Offerman, great guy, nice whiskey. The price has just gone up way too much. You know, it was $90 when I got it, and now it's $140 here at the local big, store here. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Alrighty. So we're just about to hit the half-hour mark. I want to go watch Whiskey in the Six, Rob Whiskey in the Six, hit 10,000 subscribers. It took him 5 years to do it. I will hit 10,000 subscribers in February, according to the current trajectory, and we'll have done it 2.5 years. 2.5 years. So we've been working hard on it. Aquavite Roy's going to be on there. Scotch Test Dummy is going to be on there. Should be a great show. So I'm going to cut this off at a half an hour. I know. Cut this off at half an hour. If you're watching on the replay, if you have any comments, questions, leave them down below. And if you are watching us now, head over to Whiskey in the Six in just a minute because they're about to go live. I want to thank everyone who has tuned in and everyone who's watching on the replay. If you haven't already, if you're watching this, if you haven't already subscribed, if you haven't already, give this video a thumbs up. And we will be back next week, Christmas Day, for more head-to-head comparison between an Islay and a Highland peated whiskey. All right. Again, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you over at Whiskey in the Six.